Isha ma'am, we are unable to hear you if you are saying something. We can see your presentation on screen, but we cannot hear you. Is there a problem, Isha ma'am? You're not audible to us? We will give you some time while we go ahead with the next presentation. While we allow Isha ma'am to check out her settings, hear us, but we cannot hear you, ma'am. We are unable to hear you. Are you speaking? So, okay, while we allow Isha ma'am to check her settings, we will come back to her. We move on to the next presenter meanwhile, Wahida V. Khan from Karwar. And the topic of her paper is Translation and Self-Translation as a Primordial Instinct. So, Isha ma'am, we will have Isha ma'am next when she has been able to check out her settings. Uh, Isha ma'am, in the meantime, you can log once again. Maybe the network needs to be refreshed at your end.
Ma'am, can you see my PPT?
Yes, yes,
Hello?
Wahida ma'am. Yes, Wahida ma'am, your PPT.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you so much. I'll just begin my translation as the title can be seen on the slide, Translation and Self-Translation as a Primordial Instinct. So I'm Baida Khan from Karwar, and at the outset, without wasting much time, I'll just begin my presentation. So as soon as in the Indian context, we take the term translation, the first thing that comes to our mind is, Gitanjali, our first Nobel laureate in literature. What I would like to focus here is that I think that the songs of Gitanjali got the due credit mainly because it was translated by the poet himself from Bengali to English. So, because I think that the intricate thoughts of and the nuances of intent of every writer is best known to him and or her only. So, I would like to enhance or endorse that translation more strongly than other forms of translation. But that does not mean that I demean the value or deny the importance or significance of translation in general. Because translation for me is as primordial as innate instincts, which is of course my title as well. So, to elaborate my point, I would just like to point out that we human beings are different from animals because we have two entities, consciousness and conscience. As in Persian, it is called as Ashraful Makhlukat. And this is because of our conscious understanding of our own self, we have this innate need, instinctive need to express our thoughts, feelings, ideas, or tangible forms into tangible forms and things. And to this instinct, we owe the origin of what we call as language. So, isn't this conversion of our abstract ideas, which are within our consciousness, into physical realms of speech, nothing but a sort of translation? So, this is, I feel, the translation of our intra-self into forms that can convert our inner self to the social space around us and the world at large. So, as we say, necessity is the mother of all inventions. So, the invention of language, of course, has been the greatest tool for translation through which it has carried forward the mantle of culture, from one era to another. Anyhow, and because of this translation between two languages, it is nothing but it leads to negotiation between two cultures, thus giving birth to unique hybrid identities and of course numerous dialect regions, etc., of which India, of course, is a rich amalgamation, rich heritage of this amalgamation, of course. And then if we come to the academic concept of translation studies, which of course started in 1980 and in 1913, we had the famous Gitanjali, which got the Nobel Prize. But before that, we cannot say that the translation did not play any vital role before the 20th century. We must remember that the whole gamut of European Renaissance, that was because of translation. The translation of Greek and Roman texts, into contemporary European languages. That is what triggered the whole renaissance of European civilization. Anyhow, then later on, if we consider the whole process of colonization, the European imperialistic endeavors actually in that translation played a key role. In fact, that word Orientalism, the term Orientalism, it's nothing but the translation of a Western outlook about the Eastern natives into their texts and decrees. So Edward Said, he gives a detailed and factual account about this entire manipulative game through the notion of knowledge is power, in which translation, of course, is at its heart. So I'll just conclude with the fact that the process of Rupantar to Bhashantar, where the significance of retaining the tone and intent of the aesthetic sense and as well as the cultural and emotional value of the original text is nothing but transcreation. So I can safely say that literature in many contexts is the translation of our inner self or the writer's inner self, which in turn is an amalgamation or summary of all the diasporic or hybrid circumstances in his or her life, may it be political, social, emotional, or economical. So
Yes, Wahida ma'am, you're not audible to us.
for example, a few days ago, Bombay.
No, it's okay. It's okay. Go ahead. I'm sorry, the last part was not audible to me. So I guess the presentation is concluded. Nazish ma'am, over to you for your comments.
I think we will take all the presenters first, then I'll give my concluding remarks later.
Okay, ma'am. Fine. Thank you, Wahida ma'am, for your presentation. We move over, or we move back to Isha ma'am. If Isha ma'am is ready now, we could have her paper on translating violence from texts onto screen, violation of human rights. Isha ma'am, you're not audible to us. If you are using a headset, try removing the headset. Sometimes headsets don't work. Isha ma'am, you will have to write to us. We cannot hear you. Okay. Fine. We move on then. As Isha ma'am says, she will log in from her phone. Something may be wrong with her laptop. We move on to our next presenter, V. Anuradha, who is going to talk about, this is a joint paper, and she's going to speak about multilingual composition in Premchand's selected short stories. Anuradha Venugopal.
Hello, good evening, good afternoon. Yeah, the collaboration of three authors, ma'am. So
yes.
So Sara Siddiqui, she will start the presentation, and ma'am Anuradha ma'am will just be here. Sara Siddiqui and I will both often will present the paper here. So Sara Siddiqui will just start.
Sure, all yours. Yes, all yours, please.
Hello, ma'am. Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Yeah, start. Saira, start.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone. The translation of Munshi Premchand's well-known short story Eidgah in Hindi and Dil Ki Duniya in Urdu has translated into English by the well-known novelist Kushwant Singh. He used the word tongs for Eidgah. Muslim and it's a festival of Muslims and all. Munshi Premchand is regarded as one of the finest writers for his exemplary creation in Hindi and Urdu literature. His stories peep into his sheer brilliance and he tracks the growth of his characters, their ambitions and priorities in life. His works throw a light into the psyche of the rural Indian society and its members out of many short stories that he has composed. Eidgah is one of the well known ones. Set in a village backdrop, it is a story about the bonding that builds between a 4-year-old protagonist, Hamid, and his grandma, Amina. It narrates Amina's concern for Hamid, who, when he goes out to Eidgah all by himself, and Daphne exhibits the struggle of Hamid with his own little self to overcome his desires for sweets, games, and toys in order to buy a pair of tongs for his grandmother. In all the three languages, story is the same, only translation differs. For example, the word agog is used in English version meaning very eager or curious to hear or see something. In Urdu, it means zahmat, whereas in Hindi, it means utsuk. Due to the multilingual text compositions, the translation not only differ but also gives us the different meaning. The words like agog and utsuk have maintained the excitement, whereas the word zehmat not. It turns out to be a flat meaning and hence lost the feeling. Similarly, the phrase vermicelli pudding is used in English. In Urdu text, it is sheer korma, and in Hindi, it is used as sevaiya. All the three dishes follow different ingredients. That's why cannot consider as the same dish so as emotional attachment with the dish is lessened. Similarly, in an instance, Mohsin taunts Hamid of his ignorance used a taunting tone in Hindi and Urdu. Hosh mein ho, but this tone gets dropped in English, don't you know? Because it sounds more like question. This has caused the loss of the intent to the author to convey the indirect sarcasm in the utterance. Premchand has dexterously used words in order to maintain the rural tone in his story. On several occasions, he has used distinctive words which reflect the character's emergence from a rural depth. For instance, Premchand has used ko in place of katna to be cut as a quantity interrogator. The translator, on the other hand, couldn't render it using the standard form available in the target language, that is, how much, which has caused the diminishing of the native essence of the story. Several words in the story are rooted into the culture of Indian community and bear no equivalence. In the translated text, Khushwant Singh has made an effort to search some near substitutes for these items. For example, tin fan as fodder, gota as golden thread, lotha as tiny brace pot, and Baldikal as better, Jal Vahak in Hindi, Sakha in Urdu as water carrier, Tawa as hot iron plate. In such cases where lexical items are culturally bound, their translation often results in detaching the local flavor from the text. In the story, when Mahmud brought his soldier home, his younger brothers started marching and crying like a watchman in a babbling manner. Shone walo jagte laho, which was translated as sleepers keep awake. Although the translator has attempted well to signify the babbling by misspelling sleeper, it fails in carrying the intended meaning. Conclusion: translation is a practice in which the meaning of a text is carried from one language to another. It is a practice which involves the succession of two major processes: the interpretation of second language and the production of the translated text cannot be achieved effectively. Thank you. Over to Maria.
Yes. Good afternoon, good evening. I'm supposed to say this. This is another story which I have collaborated with my colleagues. There is Premchand, the famous story of Premchand, that is Kafan, which was composed in the year 1936 and has been translated into English by two renowned translators and experts. One is by Rachanda Jalil in 1992 and by one another is David Rubin in 1962. Because I have chosen these two texts which have been very renowned and which have been very much used in the English literature, or you can say Indian, writing Indian and other regional languages here. And now the word kafan is here. Only the one word has been used in the Hindi or Urdu language, whereas in this shroud here. In other texts, in other translations, sometimes this shroud has been called as the funeral shroud here. But Rachanda Jalil and David Rubin has kept the word the shroud only here because they don't want to emphasize on what type of shroud is here. Now coming to the translation version here, I will just focus on the Rachanda Jalil here. Now you can see the Urdu words are Jamaron ka kumba tha aur sare gaon mein badnaam. Now Chamars is just with the she has used Rachanda Jalil has used the word the same Chamars in the translated version also, but in the translated version she has elaborated in giving a description of who are the charmers and to which class does they belong and what type of occupation they are dealt here. Whereas in Premchand does not specify into the detail, or he hasn't gone into a detail of what is the occupation of the Madhav and Ghesu, the two protagonists of the story here. Now another thing which Rachanda Jalil, the main point of view of Rachanda Jalil, she has translated each and every word, but not I will say she has used many passive vocabulary words. She has used a passive vocabulary here, and just like kashtaru, that is means the farmers here, and there's another word which comes into existence here, sadhu, that is anchorites here. So sadhu can be a hermit here, but just like example of Rachanda Jalil, she wanted to use a passive vocabulary. Whereas David Rubin, he has used the words like hermit, sage, and a very simple language. Whereas Rachanda Jalil has tried to modify and try to exaggerate the English language while translating this great story here. Now another thing what Rachanda Jalil has taken into consideration in this is like साइड करके घास छील करके वो शेर भर आटे का इंतजाम कर लेती थी और इन दोनों बेगरीबों का भरती रहती थी. And this word I wanted to take example here. The Rachanda Jalil has shortened the sentence and has said strive to talk the bellies here. So in this way Rashanda Jalil, at some point of the text or some point of the story, she has elaborated in explaining for the readers who are not aware of the Indian language or who are not aware of the Indian culture, and at the same time she has shortened the sentences, and which she has shortened into a very small sentence like describe the store of the bellies here. Now coming to the another aspect which Rashanda Jalil has taken care of is real translation. She hasn't changed the meaning of the sense
Sorry
here.
to interrupt, Maria ma'am, but you have to consider winding up. You have exceeded your time limit, so
Yes,
you
ma'am.
have, all of you are.
Only 2 slides. I will just
Yes,
explain
please.
in one.
Please try to wind up.
Yes.
There are a list of participants.
Sure. Thank you for giving me the time. The same thing Rashana Jalil has taken care of here. Like, she has kept the Indian context words like chamar, paisa, puri, ghee, dhotis, and damindar, sahib, and all, anas and maya and annas. The same thing she has been kept it in the literal context of Indian. Whereas David Ruman, he had changed almost all the words in his translated version here. Coming and is a real translation which aspect of Rashana Jalil she has opted in translating Premchand's short story. Coming to a literal translation is a shadow, that is Machaya translation aspect she has opted here, where she has taken off that Mary order, that is my wife, Gharwali wife, and the way she has translated Kachoria into the savory pasties here. The same thing David Rubin has also opted in his translated version here, and the same thing with the pan, that is called beaten, and a cardamom here. Overall, I will just say of Rashana Jalil, because the time constraint is here, I will cut short and said that Rashana Jalil has tried to translate each and every word except the Indian literal words, or you can say with the Indian words, Indian regional words, except all the words she has translated, and she has used excessively, you can say, the passive vocabulary. Compared to the David Roman, he has simplified the language here. In that sense, I will say the translation is a very much greater aspect. It requires a lot of concentration and hard work, and it is a sense that if you read the Urdu version or Hindi version of the short story, the English version has lost the sense of the original text. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was a very informative presentation. And we move ahead to our next presenter, Isha ma'am, who is perhaps ready now. So Isha Janti from Amity University, Haryana, who will be talking about translating violence from text onto screen, violation of human rights.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now you're audible.
Great. So I'm just give me a second. I am going to. Can you see my screen? Can you see my screen? Is the presentation
Yes,
on?
your screen is visible.
And you can hear me.
Yes.
Sorry to do this. Okay, so good evening. Finally, this is Isha Janti from Amity University, Haryana. So I will be speaking on translating violence from text onto screen, violation of human rights. So this is the way I'm going to move. So I will move straight to the introduction. So we know that cinema as visual art brings together like-minded people to create visuals that reflect society or the mood of the people. It depicts protests, empathy, violence, love, and delusion, all kinds of feelings and situations and destiny. Films are thus translations of verbal text depicting the prevailing social conditions. The disease and its treatment are quite often captured very succinctly by the authors of literary texts. They become alive in films. According to Cress van Leeuwen, multimodal texts are texts whose meanings are realized through more than one semiotic code. Multimodality, therefore, is the defining attribute of film texts. Both visual and verbal meanings can be understood as being placed parallel, which are combined in a definitive manner to form one text. Violence against women continues to be perceived as an acceptable phenomena in many societies, and therefore this theme keeps coming back from so many filmmaking countries. Many researchers like Rafter and Hickey have articulated that films act as an important source of knowledge for crime and violence. So looking at films that portray violence against women as a violation of human rights. So moving on to the research question, I'll be analyzing two Bollywood films and trying to answer the questions how the justice for human rights also needs to be translated and implemented on the visual medium on both small and large screen. Weiser and Kubrin throw light on the argument that media representation of violence can lead to audiences to back or support the conservative way to criminal justice response, which is when the victim takes revenge on the perpetrator by taking law in their own hands, leading to more violation of human rights again. Analyzing if the cinematic portrayal of domestic violence in media has made this phenomena more acceptable by women in India. So the theoretical framework that I'm following is looking at films portraying violence against women from the feminist approach that pinpoints the patriarchal values of society and the dominance of men in heterosexual relationships as the main reason for marital abuse. Also analyzing a recurring trope in which the dignity of human life is not adhered to in popular Hindi cinema and its implications as far as human rights questions is concerned. So conforming to the definition of human rights by Amnesty International Universal Declaration of Human Rights, I quote, "All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in spirit and brotherhood." So keeping on with the methodology, a survey is underway to address how Indian film audiences look at, interpret and react to gender roles and gender relations as seen in Hindi films. How do they perceive and interpret the prevalence of domestic violence as depicted in Bollywood films? Do they know what encompasses human rights? Is domestic violence a breach of human rights? Are films depicting the domestic violence translated from text? So really concluding, though I will be looking at two films, but we see that the new generation films like Dhadak, which came in 2018, Kabir Singh in 2019, and Thappad in 2020, all have portrayed violation of human rights. Going back to the question, are we accepting domestic violence as a society? Thank you so much. And apologies for taking so much time. Thank you. Thanks so much.
It's fine, ma'am. Thank you for keeping the time so well, for making it so short, lucid, compact, and it was a very new dimension to translation that you introduced. Translation cinema, human rights. It flourishes brilliantly on the intersection of all these issues. Thank you for such a compact presentation. We move ahead to our next presenter, who is Shaheen Fatima, who is a research scholar. And the topic of her paper is Translation Becomes a Means for Asserting and Reclaiming Identity, the Bodo Community. So, Shaheen, over to you.
Thank you, ma'am. First of all, I thank all the organizers. Am I audible? I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are audible. Yes, you are audible, Shaheen. Please go ahead.
Okay, ma'am, my sincere gratitude to the organizing team for organizing such a beautiful conference and providing an opportunity for me. My topic is Translation Becomes a Means for Asserting and Reclaiming Identity with reference to Bodo community. As cited in Encyclopedia Dictionary of Linguistics, script is the act of representing or representation of thoughts, ideas, and speech by conventional material signs. My paper shows that written discourse, though largely neglected by a segment, provides insignificant insight into understanding of the social existence of a particular community. The Bodos, despite a powerful ethnic group ruling various parts of Brahmaputra Valley from very ancient time, were politically marginalized by the Ahom and the Koch powers in the medieval period. It is generally believed that they had initially migrated to this region via Tibet, and they were Chinese and Bhutan from origin. The civilization of Ahom were literate and organized. They maintained their record in manuscript called Buranjis, which is derived from the word ahom, meaning storehouse of knowledge that enlightens the ignorant. Thai homes carry from their place of origin called Myanmar, where chronicles were named as Zabin, and in Brahmaputra Valley it got converted to Buranjis, originally written in Thai language, and after ruling for 600 years, that is from 16th century onwards, the language got translated to Assamese. There were two kinds of Buranjis, one maintained by the state as official and the other maintained by the families. Their language was simple, lucid, and ambiguous. The Buranjis not only described the Ahom kingdom, but also the neighboring states. They were written on the bark of sanchi trees, and later tradition of writing Buranjis was minimized as the amount of Buranji became lesser, and Assamese as a language was adopted by the king by the end of the kingdom. Later, with the influence of Sanskritization and acceptance of Bodos as Hinduism, we see that the original Buranjis written in Thai language was translated to Sanskritization. There were many such Buranjis that have been collected, compiled, translated, and published. But there are some which are still in the private hand and has been destroyed. The Eastern Assamese dialect became the standard literary language of region around 17th to 19th century, and notably used in Eastern Assam for writing Buranjis. In fact, the figure shows that around 148 paragraph out of 281 Buranjis have been translated to Assamese from J.P. Ward's account of Assam. Later, with the invasion of Mughal emperors, Buranjis also show the sign of development of Persian language. Some of these chronicles like Tabaqat-e Nasiri, Minhajuddin Tariki are examples. Later, with the political turmoil of Burma and political invasion by British, the colonizer did not destroy the trend of Ahom chronicles. And Edward Gate in 1868 to 1950 prepared a report, History of Assam. Gate not only located but also collected Buranjis, a task which was later accompanied by Asundhan and later developed by Department of Historical and Aquitanian Studies. This endeavor to arrest the process of destruction of Buranjis, Gate book on history of Assam played a pivotal role in catching the attention of people nationally and internationally. Later, this task was carried on by S.K. Bhuyan in translating and publishing manuscript from 1930 to 1938. He compiled, collated, and translated 11 Buranjis. In 1928, he published Early British Relations with Assam, a study on the record of Assam of the East India Company, Atan Baraugian and his Times, a history of Assam from the invasion of Mir Jumla in 1662 to 1663, and the termination of Assam vocal conflict in 1663. Years after this, his thesis was published again as Anglo-Assami Relation, 1771 and 1826. Some authors published modern books with the domain of Buranji, which does not include Chronicles.
Shaheen, sorry to interrupt you. Please try concluding your paper. Just give the gist.
We can just see the driving force of inspiration for the writing of majority of authors and poets in the assertion of ethnic identity and research for new literary technique and style through the medium of translation of Bodo have strived to gain back their space, asserting their voice, reclaiming their identity and rich culture that these Buranjis got translated to different languages, glorifying the heritage of Bodos. The establishment of Bodo Sahitya Sabha has enriched Bodo poetry, and we can also see the traits of Paradise Lost in the writing which was published long back. Okay, thank you. This is a small gist of the Bodo literature. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Actually, yes, Nazishma?
Yes, I was just thanking her for her presentation.
Okay. Yes, yes. So yes, it would be good, if you could just summarize your paper, keeping in mind the time specifications that we have. Thank you, Shaheen. We move over to our next paper presenter, who is Apurba De, who is a research scholar in Gulhan University, Chaibasa. And the topic of his paper is Rabindranath Tagore's Shonar Tori, translated as The Golden Boat by Bhavani Bhattacharya.
Yes.
Apurba, over to you.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Good evening, Chairperson, ma'am, Naziz Khan, ma'am, and Vasudhara, ma'am, and the other research scholars and presenter those who are here. Now, my topic is on Rabindranath Tagore's Shonar Tori, translated as Golden Boat by Bhavani Bhattacharya here. Here, the Golden Boat was translated by Bhavani Bhattacharya. That is a collection of 30 stories and sketches and 2 allegories by Rabindranath Tagore. The simplicity and the charm of Tagore's writing we also find in the translation work of Bhavani Bhattacharya also in here. Bhattacharya mentioned in the translator's note in the book what he is writing on works of Rabindranath Tagore. He said, the Golden Boat is not an English rendering of Shonar Tori, the volume of verses that has given the present work its title. The selection covers a number of Tagore's book. The Golden Boat carries gleanings from many fields of Tagore's writing. This is the significance of its name. It is difficult to cast a translation work in this type of collection of 30 stories and sketches and allegories of Rabindranath Tagore, selection from mouth of one language into that of another language. Bhattacharya here gave more importance to its main focus on the matter with the care of dynamics of Rabindranath Tagore's style. Now, a word for word rendering cannot be done between two languages completely different from each other. As for Bengali, other is English. So here the methods of expression between English and Bengali are different. It is therefore difficult to find complete equivalence between their words and their synonyms. Rabindranath Tagore is a versatile genius. Here in this collection of stories, Tagore, we see an amalgamation of discrete stories from different dimensional perspective of subjects. Bhattacharya here genuinely captured and translated those perspectives of the aesthetic taste of the story by Tagore in English language. The writing language of the author may not be the accessible language of the reader, but it is not necessary to write in the accessible language only. Here comes the role of the translation and the translator. Bhavani Bhattacharya translated Tagore's selected stories without any subjective interference and follows the style and expression of the story as it demanded. Bhavani Bhattacharya was greatly influenced by Rabindranath Tagore and Mahatma Gandhi. While Gandhi stands for truth, Tagore stands for beauty in its multifarious manifestations. Here Bhavani Bhattacharya was greatly influenced by the Tagore stories which he translated. It gave Bhattacharya astonishing way of expression with aesthetic taste in plot characterization, which he in near future and in his other writings on the novel, as for So Many Hangers and others, Music for Mohini, he used that aesthetic techniques. So Rabindranath Tagore, the first Nobel Prize winner from Asia, is known the West for Gitanjali song offering. But when he began to discuss his own translation, nobody could even dream of such a separate discipline at that point of time, simply because translation was still considered as a secondary activity traditionally known as the foreign language learning method. One of the basic problems faced by a translator while rendering a text from one language to another is that of equivalence. Tagore was well aware of this basic problem of equivalence in translation from his first-hand experience of self-translation. So do the Bhattacharya also here uses that technique in his translation work of Rabindranath Tagore. This collection consists of almost all type of human experiences, as from childhood to death, from mythology to creativity of human mind. Here I wanted to tell a story from this collection named Wrong Man in Workers'
Apurba,
Paradise.
you will have to wind up. Apurva, consider concluding, consider winding up.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Here I want to say that Bhattacharya applies all that qualities and the aesthetic beauties which is required for the work to be translated from Bengali to English without discriminate, without disturb the taste of the main work by Tagore in Bengali. Thank you. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Apurva.
Thank you, Apurva.
We move over to our next presenter, that is Kumar Yashwant, who's a research scholar from Ranchi University. And the title of his paper is Gitanjali and Self-Translation, a new narration or an authentic translation. Kumar Yashwant, over to you. Please keep the time limit.
Thank you, ma'am, and good evening to all of you. So now the title of my paper itself suggests Gitanjali and Self-Translation, a new narration, authentic translation. Itself it suggests that I will be looking on the paper that whether I am going, whether the self-translated text of Gitanjali is an authentic translation or Tagore is narrating certain new things in that translated text. If we look at the certain backgrounds of the of the original text and the translated text, then we will find that the Gitanjali translated text consists of 103 poems, prose poems, but the original text contains of 157 poems which are lyrical and enriched. And even though we considered it authentic translation, why? Because of the central idea, that is spiritualism, mysticism, and devotion, are highly elaborated by Tagore in his self-translated text. And in a work, Rainer Gildin writes in his work Translated Self-Translation and the Retranslation, he writes that the fidelity to meaning of the words, meaning of the original words is less regarded in comparison to the fidelity of the original idea. That is why when Tagore writes self-translates his work, that is Gitanjali, he translates his work with overall 53 poems from Gitanjali and rest 50 poems from Naivedya and Khaya. And in all these 103 poems, he stick to his central idea, which is almost similar in that of original Gitanjali text, that is spiritualism, mysticism, and devotion. His mysticism, devotion, and spiritualism is so much elaborated, so much fascinated by W.B. Yeats that he visited Bengal to inquire about himself, where he find many stories about him, about Tagore, and there he heard that Tagore used to sit for 2 hours in the morning for in front of the nature, in front of God, in front of nature, and that is why he writes such lines, and that is why he is so genuine while writing such lines. When he writes that in the song 15 of the translated text, I am here to sing these songs in this hall of thine. I leave corner seat. In thy world, I have no work to do. My useless life can only break out in tunes without a purpose. These are the two beginning lines of the song 15. And after reading these two beginning lines, W.B. Yeats feel no shame while introducing Tagore in front of the European audience. And thus he writes, he sits immovable in contemplation and for 2 hours does not awake from his reveries upon the nature of God, and this is how he is devoted to God and its creation. His translated text not only admired the W.B. Yeats, it also admired William Rothingston, who feels free to write, and he writes as, William Rothenstein was actually the one who introduced the manuscript to W.B. Yeats, and he writes that here is poetry of a new order, which seemed to me on a level with that of great mystics. He is the one who finds the mysticism and who introduces the mysticism in the translated text of Gitanjali to W.B. Yeats, and he also supports Rabindranath Tagore for his first publication in the English in the European nation. And there are several points where we consider that the translated text is an authentic translation, which I have mentioned in my paper, but I conclude here itself just because of shortage of very time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Yashwant. You kept your time well. And we move over to our next presenter. This is a joint paper by Swarnava Chaudhary and Devapriti Sengupta from the Department of English, Sanskrit College and University, Kolkata. And the title of their paper is National, a Journey. So,
hello,
yes, over to them.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Yes.
Yes, please go ahead.
The topic of our paper is From Regional to National, a Journey. Kirdar, 1993 to 1994, was an Indian television series aired on Doordarshan and was directed by Gulzar. One episode of the series adapted the Bengali story Adab by Somaresh Bosu for national television. Through this argument, we will try to portray how the director has translated and transcreated to represent the text from page to screen and has successfully maintained the originality of the text as well as incorporated his intellect in order to enrich the process of movie making. The story of both the text and the screen portray a riot-trodden India. However, the time frame of the portrayal is near about 40 odd years apart, so when this episode of the series was aired, English as a language had already made its way till the working class. Therefore, when we see that the two protagonists are using English words while conversing on screen, we are immediately reminded of the bygone time. What would have been the remotest possibility when the story was written in 1946 becomes a very common phenomenon in the year 1993. The director has made this change in order to maintain the relevance of the story. During this classified journey from page to the television screen, the principal story does not lose its aesthetic beauties. Both the texts start with the sound of a siren, which immediately triggers our response to the fact that the time of the plot is a tumultuous one. It at once makes us feel that something is grossly wrong. As we move further into the text, we gradually understand that our premonition has been correct. The two communities, Hindu and the Muslims, are at war with each other. This can be perceived as an aftermath of the divide and rule policy of the colonizers, as will be discussed by my fellow presenter, Devapriti Sengupta. Over to you.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Yes, you are audible.
The majority of the action takes place in a dustbin, which metaphorically represents the poor condition of the people who are most affected by the riot, as well as the pitiful situation of law and order in the country at that time. The primary conversation between the two characters who try desperately to figure out each other's religious identities show us how the mind of the people, show us how the poison of communalism has been successfully injected into the mind of the people. While the author has used various literary terms and devices to bring forth the gravity of the situation and the helplessness of the laborers to reach his family members on the day of Eid, the director has used the means of light, background score, and visual effects to do the same, like the use of siren, the sound of the patrolling soldiers, the distant gun sound, burning fire, which all adds up to the destructive atmosphere. While the story completes its journey with the distant sound of the gunshots, the director uses the title song to bring about a thematic closure to the entire narrative of the story. The journey of the two characters comes to a full circle by the ghazal of Jagjit Singh, quote, "किताबों से कभी गुजरो तो यूं किरदार मिलते हैं," unquote. If we roughly translate the ghazal used at the beginning and at the end of the episode, we will come upon this inference that religion has always been a construct and friendship has the power to overcome the hurdles of communalism even when we are sitting in a dustbin amongst a curfew in a riot-trodden night. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a wonderful presentation, and the way you shared it, and we really appreciate you for that. So thank you very much. We move over to our next presenter, but perhaps I cannot trace her here. I will just repeat my call for her. So Divya Naikwadi from Telangana, is she here? So we'll move on and we will see, she is joining us. Divya, it is your turn now. Are you ready to present? So our next presenter is Divya Naikwadi from Telangana, and the topic of her paper is Translation and History. Divya, can you hear us?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, yes.
Hello.
Okay. Yes, over to you, Divya.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Divya Naikwadi from ZPHS Boys High School. I'm working as school assistant. Today, I'm going to present a paper on translation and history. Okay. Many researchers and historians have discussed about the history of translation. It's a widely accepted notion that Bible is considered as pioneer of translation. The Bible gives the intentiveness and of intercommunication of various speakers in different languages from distinct places. Translation is considered to be an intellectual act where etymological and dialectical discourses accomplished in one language is to be effectively carried out without changing the meaning into another language. It is an activity of passing the possession of linguistic theme from one language to another without bringing change in concept and theme. It is considered as an outcome of language. For the expansion and development of linguistic enlightenment, facts, ideas, and translation, it is considered to be essential. For productive and compassionate intercommunication among various cultures and traditions, translation is a definite necessity. It is considered to be the medium through which various works of languages can be viewed by many in their own language and to expand one's own language. People all over the world take pleasure in reading literary translations, and that is the reason translation works are being done. Different translatory works of plays, fictional and non-fictional works, poems and prose are being read by people of various languages to learn about various literary techniques used by authors universally. Cultural variance can be observed as a major impediment for translating, as words resonate a culture and use of language reflect the society. So various sentiments and emotions used in a language reflect the social constraints of that particular language, and they may or may not exist in other languages. Translation has become a significant need in the modern days for communication and cooperation, both emotionally and professionally. The demand for translation has arisen due to the continuous expansion of business development internationally and to achieve success in universal markets. The word translation is derived from a Latin term meaning to bring or to carry across. One more term, a metaphrase, has a meaning word-to-word translation is derived from a Greek word metaphrases, which means to speak across. These terms give us the insight of the history of translation theories. The history of translation roots back to Mesopotamian era, where Gilgamesh, the Sumerian poem, was being translated to ancient languages, which dates back to 2nd millennium BC. The ancient Indian documented works of translation by the Buddhist monks into Chinese is another exquisite example of translation in primitive ages. Later on, Romantic poets adapted and translated ancient Greek texts to enhance and enrich the delightment and enjoyment of the works of literature for the readers. Even Cicero and Horace of Rome translated many literary works and extended and developed their practice. Their services continued in the 17th century also. We should be thankful for the Arabic scholars for their knowledge and findings regarding Greek academics, which were recreated so widely that the translation got accreditation. After occupying the Greek kingdom, the Arabic scholars translated their works and built many versions based on their scientific, delightful, and reflective understandings. The versions again were recreated in Latin and various other languages, providing a strong base for Renaissance academics. With the advancement of religious and spiritual theories, the necessity of translation grew much more than ever. As belief in religion gained thought, the desire to encourage and spread of religion and religious texts emerged, and availability of the texts in many languages became a need. The Old Testament is considered as first translated religious text from English to Greek in the 3rd century BC. The translation refers to a Latin word, Septuagint, which means 70. Hebrew Bible was also translated to Greek and mostly
Divya, sorry to interrupt you, but please consider winding up your paper.
Okay, ma'am. Okay. The translation was being carried out by 70 scholars using traditional translatory methods. It laid the foundation for many later translations and Bible translations into many other languages. Mostly the translators have kept the characters in secrecy, and many anonymous people have contributed greatly, giving many ideas and thoughts to the theories from ages. Working as a translator was considered extremely hazardous, and a few translations lost their lives while working on the translations. Translators like William Tyndale, who tried to translate the Bible into English, was executed in the year 1536 in Holland. After the Industrial Revolutions, economically, globally advanced and evolved rapidly and successfully. Due to the introduction of internet, there was a revolutionary change universally. The capability to view, translate, and understand works and articles from all over the world emerged. And with the help of modern tools and techniques, culture, tradition, and language of any place or country became viewable and accessible by everyone. Some special platforms emerged which can easily translate written and spoken words from one language to the other based on their necessity. So hereby I end the paper, and thank you all for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you, Divya. Thank you. We move ahead to our next presenter, Manish Prabhakar Singh, who is a faculty in the Department of English, Model College, Kharwasa. And the topic of his paper is Weaving the Narrative, Urmila Pawar's Quest in the Weave of My Life. Manish, over to you, and please try to keep your time.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Good evening, everyone. So the title of my paper is Weaving the Narrative, Urmila Pawar's Quest in the Weave of My Life. Urmila Pawar belongs to the Mahar community from a small village near Ratnagiri in the Konkan area, and wrote her autobiographical narrative Ayadan, which was translated into English by Maya Pandit as The Weave of My Life, a Dalit woman's memoir. It is an important milestone in Dalit women's writing and stands among the notable contributions made by Dalit women's writers. Translating a text not only breaks a linguistic barrier, but also provides a platform for that particular text to have a global impact. Ayadan, written in regional language, restricts its reach, but its translation in English, and especially as it is an autobiography, it allows women writers to have an insight into the quest of their self and identity in larger perspective. What makes The Weave of My Life to retain the soul of Ayadan is that the translation by Maya Pandit retains the regional terms, making it possible to keep the original flavors intact. Her engaged translation helps us as a reader to understand that the text, though an autobiography, is quite different. She is able to weave the same metaphor of the writing technique as employed by Pawar. Weaving happens to be the central metaphor and the main profession of Pawar's mother, indicating the lower caste as well as dire economic conditions. She weaves together the struggle faced by the three generations of Dalit women searching for their own voice and identity. She sketches the invisible identity of the women within her community and the roles they are expected to perform within a family. Pawar's voice throughout the narration does not showcase the anger which is often seen in Dalit writings, but rather a blunt question interrogating the established ideologies of caste, patriarchy, and of course culture. In a way, she presents her personal tragedy to create consciousness among the Dalit women. It becomes the tale of her resilience and grit. The humiliation she felt and the exploitations as a girl child is clearly brought when she describes the hunger and the insults it comes with. Pawar is able to reflect on her experience by describing her memories about food and the poverty which the readers can feel and many of them can associate with. The innocence of a naive child was becoming aware that they were born into a particular caste and in poverty they had to live accordingly. By talking about the politics of food, Pawar is able to present a cultural difference which more often than not act as a barrier. Narrating her life, she presents her personal tragedy and creates consciousness among the Dalit women. Though it's the quest of a personal narrative, it focuses more on the community rather than on an individual. As the title suggests, it becomes an intricate weave of several stories tracing the evolution of feminist entity growing gradually. Her use of earthly language and the vocabulary with the raw usage becomes illustrative of the silent voice. Marathi Dalit literature is generally characterized by anger and revolt, but Pawar's ability marks a shift and the narrative has an ironical tone. The translation brings it closer to Pan-India, making us understand the social bias and prejudices which are still prevalent in the society. The translation retains the charms of proverbs and folk songs as well as free use of abusive terms, keeping it closer to the touch of soil. The translated text like Adan provides the self-authentication for Dalit literature, and similar to Urmila Pawar's journey for her own self and its celebration, translation becomes the celebration of difference. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Manish. Thank you for keeping your time. We move over to our next presenter, Anjana Rajiv from St. Albert's College, Kerala. And the topic of the paper is When Translation Becomes Transcreation, a comparative study of O.V. Vijayan's Khasakinte Itihasam and the Legends of Khasak. Anjana, over to you.
Hello, ma'am. Am I audible to you?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay. My name is Sanjana Rajiv, and the topic of my paper is When Translation Became Transcreation, a comparative study on O.V. Vijayan's Khasakinte Itihasam and the Legends of Khasak. Language is nothing but a tool of meaning construction. Translation takes us beyond language. Khasakinte Itihasam, a 20th century novel by Vijayan, is a literary work in Malayalam which has brought a change in the aspects of writing literary works in Malayalam, where the era of literature has been divided into pre-Khasakian and post-Khasakian, that is before and after Khasakinte Itihasam. Khasakinte Itihasam took 12 years writing and rewriting to reach its final form, and the time duration of 25 years to make this magnum opus into the global language has made a great change in Vijayan as well as his text. In the words of Walter Benjamin, it is the task of the translator to release in his own language that pure language that is under the spell of another, to liberate a language imprisoned in a work and his recreation of that work. This gets reflected in the novel when Khasakinte Itihasam got translated to English under the title The Legends of Khasak. The socio-political retrospect of the text get bent into the spiritual phases. The paper titled When Translation Became Transcreation, a comparative study on O.V. Vijayan's Khasakinte Itihasam and the Legends of Khasak, endeavors to bring forth the transformation underwent during the translation of a Malayalam text into English. The novel begins with the arrival of Revi, the protagonist of the novel, a visionary in astrophysics to Kazakh as a teacher in a single teacher school, and ends when Levi leaves from the Kazakh to another realm of existence, which marks the arrival of Vijayan into the world of literature. As the title suggests, Kazakh in Idihasam is a narration on Kazakh, a reflection of Tasrak in Kerala, or an epic of Kazakh and lives in it. When the work gets translated to English rather than a translation, readers considered it as an independent work of O.V. Vijayan, which encounters the spiritual and philosophical bent of the human mind. The novel Kazakh and Idihasam emphasizes the local, regional life of people in Kazakh, whereas its translation enclosed the national. The class differences and subcultures of the village Kazakh has changed to caste differences. A clear generalization of the subject creates a new text. Vijayan narrates the myth of Kazakh in the chapter The Return in the original text as the ghost of Sheikh who lived there was worshipped by the Rautas and Iravas of Kazakh. When it gets translated to English, it becomes both the Muslims and Hindus of Kazakh look upon the Sheikh as their protecting deity. Here, the Rautas and Iravas, two subcastes under Muslims and Hindus, were generalized to make non-Malayali readers understand the context of the text. Even in one of the impressions of English, the cover page, rather than giving the image of Kazakh, it was occupied by the image of a Maharashtrian warrior and a Mughal emperor who doesn't have a role in the novel. Oren Pamuk once said that a huge amount of human emotion is not expressed in English. It is difficult to translate a work of Vijayan into English without losing the essence of the text. Kazakh is filled with dense images of nature, old folk customs prevalent among the villagers, dialects of the minorities are difficult to render into English. One cannot replace words like Othupalli, Ashan Pallikudam, Badaringal, Ingalu, etc., which he did was instead of recreating it, he had adopted those Malayalam words into English and indexed everywhere, and the translation of the source text into English had made it easier even for those who can't understand Malayalam, who get to know about the context without its soul. The process of translation into trans-regional languages like English reconstitute a literary work. Vijayan's strategies of translation produce another text for Indian English literature rather than a translation of Kazakh and Idihasam. In the absence of the socio-political cultural backdrops of Kazakh, an add-on point about make the translation an other, and the novel Legends of Kazakh may not be said as the translation of Kazakh and Idihasam. It can be taken granted as another work by the same author since it narrates Kazakh from a different perspective. And hereby end my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Anjana. That was a very, very well presented and a very, very well, scheduled presentation. Thank you so much. We move ahead to our next presenter, Nishit Kumar, who is a doctoral candidate in the Jawaharlal Nehru University. And the topic of the paper is Howard Goldblatt's translations of Mo Yan's work in English, Innovations and Strategy. Over to you, Nishit.
Thank you, Dr. Rai. Thank you, Chair Dr. Najis Khan and the organizing committee for providing me opportunity to share my work with you all. As Dr. Rai told, that the topic of my presentation is Howard Goldblatt translation of Mo Yan's work in English, Innovation and Strategy. So let me first introduce who is Mo Yan and who is Howard Goldblatt. Mo Yan is the pen name of Kwan Mo Ye. He was born in a small village in Komi in People's Republic of China in 1955 in upper middle peasant family. And because he was born in upper middle peasant family, during the Cultural Revolution, he has to drop out from the primary school. And later he directly joined as a graduate student in People's Liberation Army College. He has written 11 novels, 30 novellas, and more than 100 short stories. He has been awarded Nobel Prize in 2012 for his work is termed as a new genre, extending from realism to magical realism to hallucinatory realism. And Howard Goldblatt. Howard Goldblatt is one of America's most prolific and influential translator of Chinese literature. He's a scholar, he's a professor, retired now. He's also an author and translator. He was born in 1939, joined the US Navy and posted in Taiwan, where he learned the language and the culture. And when he returned back to US, he started translating. Famous American writer John Updike described the translation of contemporary Chinese novel in America as Howard Goldblatt's Lonely Province. However, Howard Goldblatt is not the first one to translate Moyen's work in English. Other translators as Professor Michael Duke, Janice Vickery, Christopher Smith, Mei Chung, Yu Fan Chin, etc. has translated Moyen's work before Howard Goldblatt's. However, Howard Goldblatt is designated by Moyen as the official translator of his works and also the most famous one. Some critics have claimed when Moyen was awarded the Nobel Prize that who won the novel, the original writer Moyen or the English translator Howard Goldblatt's work. So keeping this in view, I am exploring two questions in this paper. First, what strategies have been used by Howard Goldblatt in translating Moyen's work from Chinese to English? Second is why these strategies are successful in holding the attention of international readers, while others translators are not be able to. So this is a kind of case study of Howard Goldblatt's translation. The first of Moyen's work that was translated by Howard Goldblatt is Red Sorghum in 1993. The original novel, the name of original novel was Hung Ko Liang Chiatsu. It means Red Sorghum family. However, Howard Goldblatt translated the title as The Red Sorghum, a novel of China. So he's putting another extra word in the very title that this is a novel from China. This work was already a famous work in China through Zhang Yimou debut movie, which was based on this novel, and this work won the Golden Bear Award in Germany. Howard Goldblatt translation of Red Sorghum does not follow the same structure of the original Chinese version. He altered it massively, which is far from fidelity to the original in Chinese text. He restructured the original, and instead of presenting it in 9 chapters, he reduced it to only 5 chapters. Along with this, he added subtitles in the chapters. Second, an absolute different ending from the original one is recreated in the translated version. In addition to this, various changes are made to meet the aesthetic sense and prevailing political philosophy of the West, which is totally not in the line with Chinese political philosophy. For example, he omitted some narration, some characters which are totally a communist character in the novel. Another example for minute observation in Howard Goldblatt translations is by exploring another novel which he translated, The Garlic Ballad. By exploring the dialectical expressions in this translated version, another critic who concluded that his translating view is to read Chinese and to write in English. In a sense, it could be looked at like rewriting Chinese source text in English text. And this is the dominating translating strategy by Howard Goldblatt in most of his translation. And the third example, if we analyze the translation of cultural specific expressions in another novel, which titled as Big Breasts and Wide Hips, he translates Mao Qiang as cat's mew, whereas Mao Qiang is actually a form of local opera in China. But this is kind of musical, which is also related to the cat's sound. Another comparison, if we take the cultural specific expression in another novel, is Life and Death Are Wearing Me Out. It has been found that Howard Goldblatt implied 2 methods to reproduce information contained in the source text, that is cultural modulation and pseudo-fidelity. Scholar Wang analyzed that Howard Goldblatt translation of Chinese proverbs in Life and Death Are Wearing Me Out according to the Never's 5 translation methods, and concluded that Howard Goldblatt's literal translation could be either accurate or inaccurate. Omissions could make the original cultural images inaccessible to English readers. Adaptation could only deliver part of the original meaning to English readers. Faithful translations can carry the full meaning of the source text, but hard to precisely preserve the original form and content completely. Both semantic and communicative translations can be functionally equivalent to their source text and easier to read. In the study of idiom translation in the translated works, his translation could be said as word for word translation for linguistic dimension, but word for word translation also in cultural dimension. He also uses rewriting method for communicative dimension. By looking all these translations from Chinese text to English text, I'm trying to develop a kind of theoretical method totally based on the case study of Howard Goldblatt translation, which is termed as reader-oriented translation. Here, the translator is first the reader who is reading the original text, and then he becomes a writer by translating the work. Even according to the Howard Goldblatt, translation is a vehicle of communication. Translations are senders of information to readers. He sees himself as a sender of information. To quote from him, a communicator and interpreter, a major node of the chain to understand the world. Eventually, as a translator, everything he has tried his utmost efforts to fulfill is for the audience, by the audience, and of the audience to receive his message. And that's all for my presentation today. Thank you, everyone, for your patient listening.
Thank you, Nishit. That was a wonderful presentation. We have finished, we have done with 11 presentations session. 5 more were scheduled. We had 16 presentations in all, but I cannot seem to trace the presenters. I believe they are missing. I sent out a written call for them. I will once again call out their names, So our next presenter would have been Papri Kakati from the Department of English, Assam. Papri Kakati, are you present? Then we had Aishwarya. The details of her affiliation were not sent to us. This was the only name mentioned in the title, in the abstract. Aishwarya. Then we had Ritvik Pal, who was a student from the University of Burdwan. Ritvik Pal. Ritvik, are you present? We also had a student from FLU Hyderabad, Dhananjoy Mahahaldar. Dhananjoy. And there was Vimal Matthew, a student from Thrissur, Kerala. Vimal Matthew. So I could not trace them. I looked them up in the people list. They are not here in this chat room. And so I think there's no point waiting for them. And we can, invite our chairperson, Dr. Nazish Khan, to offer her comments on the session and to bring the session to a conclusion. Nazish ma'am, I invite you for your comments. Ma'am, you have to unmute.
Hello. Can you hear me now?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay. Thank you, Vasudhara. And I must thank all the presenters today who came up with such varied topics. And I really liked and enjoyed listening to each one of you. And I'll sum up the session in just a few words. I'll discuss each paper with few comments. The first paper that was presented was by Wahida Khan. It was translation and self-translation as primordial instinct. I think it was the first paper. And in this paper, she discussed Tagore's Gitanjali. And she discussed it in the sense of in the context of self-translation, and she said that we are conscious beings, and hence the language is originated. The language is very very personal to us, very subjective to us, and when we think. Okay, and when we express our thinking, our ideas, that is also a sort of translation, how we present ourselves, how we present our inner feelings, how we translate it into words. So she also discussed some historical aspects. She traced it to European Renaissance. I think it was an interesting presentation. I like the presentation of Isha Janiti also, but I must say that instead of she worked, her topic was translating violence from text to screen, a violation of human rights. And she, in particular, she discussed 3 movies. And I think translation of violence is not, I don't think it comes under the area of translation studies. It is more like translation of an abstract idea. Okay, how violence, which is seeped in our society, domestic violence or violence against women, how it is seeped in a society, that idea is expressed through screen, through movies, through TV, etc. So that was a translation of an abstract idea. Then there was Shaheen Fatma. Shaheen Fatma, I liked your presentation, but your translation was about translation. Your presentation was about translating as a means of stressing identity of the Bodo community. There were a lot of factual details in your presentation, and since we had the time limit, so I understand that you could not cover everything, every aspect about it. It was a long historical, how you have traced back the Bodo community's translation or Bodo community's expression from the very original, from the very beginning to the recent times, through the colonial times. So it was a very elaborate kind of a lecture, and I would have really enjoyed to listen the whole of it, but due to the time constraint, we could not go through with it. Then today I observed that a lot of presentations were about Tagore, his translation, his self-translation, and a few of them, Apurva Dev, I think. No, that was not. Okay, it was about The Golden Boat by Bhattacharya. It was a collection of story by Tagore, and it was translated by Bhavani Bhattacharya. There were few stories that he discussed, and he said that since word-to-word rendering of the text is not possible, so it's not possible to translation always means that it is not just a literal translation, but it is also a translation of an idea, of a concept, of a culture. And since it is not possible, he seems to agree with Bhattacharya's translation, and he says that how Bhattacharya has been, he has been successful in capturing the essence of the original text, and how there are very less subjective interferences through the text. Then Swarma Chaudhary, they have discussed, there are 2 presenters, I forgot the name of the other one, 2 presenters who have, they have discussed the Bengali short story, how it was, translated into a visual medium, and how, what, devices were used by the director to do justice to the written text, and how the original story was written in 1946, and later on when it was, it was modified for the screen, how there were certain changes which the directors used, like there were characters who were speaking in mixed language, they were using English words also. So the director must have done that in order to make the characters more realistic according to the times, more relevant to their times. And they have also, I think that this was a nice way of saying that they also emphasized how the director had used various theatrical devices like background effect, the background music, the lighting effects, and how he used he incorporated ghazals by various singers in order to depict, in order to convey the meaning, in order to convey the connotations of the text. So how various mediums were used to translate the story and present it, make it more presentable on screen. That was a good effect, good presentation. And Manish Prabhakar, he came up with a presentation. His article goes on an autobiographical narrative. Translation by Maya Pandit. and he says that how the translation was very important. Translating this text was the importance of translating this text was that it was able to communicate, the problems, the challenges, and the problems that the Dalit women face in Maharashtra. And this text was, it was like the voice. It was able to communicate the voice, the anger, and the problems and the challenges that women faced, the Dalit women faced in Maharashtra. There was one article one presentation by Divya Nayakwadi. It was translation and history, but I'm very sorry. I lost my connection as soon as she started, and I came back very late when she was just winding up. And I think whatever I could gather, I think it was about the translation, a historical journey of translation, and she started right from the European translation of various texts and the translation of Bible, and what were the challenges that the translators in those days faced. Nishit Kumar's translation, I must congratulate you for a very good paper, very good presentation, because this writer is not known to me, Moin, but you said that you were able to capture, you were able to express it very clearly. So I'm saying that when you said that when he got a Nobel Prize in 2012, people said whether it is who won the prize, whether it was the original writer or the translated work. So how you have you have been able to assess Howard Goldblatt according to the translations that he has made. You said that his translations are not like the usual translations. Generally, the translators they feel they have this challenge to translate the original text, and they have to capture the nuances, the meaning, the cultural context, everything. The idioms, phrases, they have to stick as close as possible to the original text. That is their mission. That is their job. But here, here Howard Goldblatt has deviated from the text so much as that you said that it is a more reader-centered kind of approach, a reader-oriented approach, and he has, in a way, you can say that whatever I could capture, take from your presentation, that he has deviated from the original text in so many ways. Like he has reduced the chapters, he has introduced subtitles, and he has also, taken liberties with translating the aesthetic, sense also. Sometimes the cultural specific expressions have been changed, the idioms and phrases have been changed. And while I was listening to your presentation, I remembered, this is something which when the colonizers, when the British came to India, they took it as a mission to translate the original Indian works into English. And when they did that, they had a very prejudiced mind, because they wanted an Oriental text to be communicated to the West. And similar, so they made, they took liberties, and they had their own, you can say prejudices to, while translating those works. Same thing I can see here also, because he's trying to make the translation or the translated work or Chinese novel more reader friendly. He is, making it more, even he has changed the basics, Chinese philosophy, to make it more suitable for the Westerners, for the Western philosophers, or the Western audiences to understand it. So I think that is going a bit too far, because a translator's job is not, changing the text, but he has changed it in so many ways in order to make it more, suitable for the Western audiences, that sometimes even the main essence or the gist of the text can also be changed. So I think that is all about today. We had some presentations which are very good and very, they were, it was very, good to listen to them. And I must congratulate the Department of English, Karim City College, for bringing about such a wonderful session and wonderful conference. And I congratulate all the team of Dr. Yahya. Dr. Yahya, as we know that he has been very, very busy in the past few months, and he has been, he has roped in various stalwarts from all fields, and almost every day we are having some program or the other. So I must congratulate the team efforts of Karim City College. Thank you for having me in as a chairperson for this session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. We are extremely grateful to Nazish for being able to devote time from her busy schedule for us. She has also been with us through most of our programs, and we are very grateful for her encouragement and for her support. Thank you to all the paper presenters. There were 16 presentations, as I repeat again. There were 16 presentations scheduled, of which we had 11 presentations. 5 of the paper presenters did not turn up. So these 11 presentations, I believe, were very, very enriching in their own way, and all of them took up different aspects of translation. We will very soon, after the seminar, we will begin the process of dispatching certificates. So your e-certificates will be mailed to all of you at your registered email IDs. And we will also, I believe, within a month, we will send out a call for papers, and selected proceedings, of the seminar will be published in a good book. So we hope to bring forward, the proceedings in a published form. And not every paper will be published. So we will send out a call for papers. So you have around 1 to 1.5 months to get ready with your papers. And we hope that many of you will be able to contribute to this volume that we expect to bring out from the Department of English. So thank you, each one of you, for being with us today. Thank you, Nazish ma'am, once again for your support.
Thank you.
And we hope you will join us. All of you will join us for tomorrow's session also. We have 3 interesting sessions lined up tomorrow. So we will be listening to Anisur sir properly. So he has been speaking in almost every session, but his formal session is tomorrow. We will also be listening to Professor Nizar Sartavi, whose lecture could not be held the other day because of some problems at his end. And we will also be listening to Professor Amir Hussain from UK. So these 3 are interesting sessions lined up tomorrow, and we hope that we will be able to meet you again tomorrow. Thank you so much for being with us.